workshop that we're going to host this year, thanks to COVID, but I think it is very timely. It is seed saving for beginners. And we are very happy that David is joining us, the expert. He's with FarmFolk CityFolk, and I'm sure he can introduce himself a little bit better than I can. But while many of us at Squamish can have been casual seed savers, I definitely don't feel like I'm have the knowledge to talk about it as an expert. So I'm glad to be bringing in David. And maybe David, you can introduce yourself and your expertise on seed saving.
Okay, I will do that. I think I have everybody's microphones muted. Maybe later on there'll be time to ask questions. You should have access to a chat box on the bottom of your screen. Feel free to send questions in. I'm hoping that this can be more a question and answer workshop rather than me rambling on about stuff that you don't need to know. I guess I'll just first start saying it looks like there's people from all over the place. I am zooming in from the unceded territory of the Kwantlen First Nations people. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm promoting a food system that is a colonial-based food system, and it's being imposed on top of land that is and was and continues to be an existing food system. I'm just feeling a need to say that these days. So we're doing our best, and we have a good system, but there's already other ones in place. I work with FarmFolk CityFolk. I direct the BC Seed Security Program, and I'm a provincial representative of the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security, which is a national program. So we're connected to reps in other provinces, and we run projects and programs across Canada. Prior to this, about a year ago, I've spent the last 15 to 20 years farming. I do a lot of mixed farming, and I've always been involved in seeds. I started farming in community gardens, so that's my community garden background, and I've always been growing seeds. So I did have a number of questions that Jessica collected from people, so I'm hoping to make sure I answer those and respond to them. I will start probably with just a brief presentation. I looked at those questions and I put together a mixture of different PowerPoints, and I'm hoping to address the questions as I go through it, but I'm going to try to breeze through the PowerPoints. If we want to come back and look at any of the pictures or images or talk about it, we can, but I'd like to try to do it in about half an hour, so we just have half an hour of questions back and forth. There's a few more people joining. Okay, so I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and I'll just run a PowerPoint for a little bit. Okay, hopefully everybody can see this, and I'll just sort of move through them. So, first of all, just sort of very briefly, I think I'm talking to the converted here. There's lots of benefits of seed saving. You don't have to buy seeds. I will give you a warning though, you'll probably, if you value the amount of time you spend in the garden, you're probably it's gonna cost you more to grow your own seeds than to buy seeds. So hopefully that's not the only reason you do it. Same reason we probably don't grow food in our backyard just to save money. It's because it tastes better and it produces better. I'll talk to some of these other things before. There's been a lot of loss of diversity over the last 100 years, and I think we probably we all have a part to play in that and bringing that back again. So just quickly, sort of a brief difference between seed saving and seed breeding. For me, seed saving is a fairly passive process. You don't think too much about it sometimes until the end of the year, and you notice that there's a whole lot of seeds on your plants, and you think, well, I think I'm going to save those. And it's a great way to save seeds. I encourage everybody to do it, and then planting them and seeing how they grow out the next year will teach you a lot. But what I would promote is seed breeding, and hopefully nobody gets scared away by that term. I think in order to be a good seed saver, you should know how to be a seed breeder, and you don't need a university degree to do this. All of our ancestors have done this for 10,000 years, or at least some of them. But breeding is an active process. You kind of think about the process as you start it. You don't just wait till the seeds are finished at the end of the year. You might decide on what your goals are. You probably are going to decide what plant you want to breed. Is it a beet or carrot? You think about the parents that you use for your breeding, so you don't just get a carrot from the store and plant it. And then constant observations and culling and looking at the plant and basically saving from the desired plants. So very briefly, for starters, Seed Breeding 101, learn what your flower anatomy is. It'll tell you a lot about the plants. There were some questions, I think I responded to some questions, people wondering if they could save seeds from non-flowering plants. And I'll just mention, we probably don't always see the flowers from plants, but all plants flower, except for maybe ferns and horsetails, and those make spores. But every other plant will flower. So any plant you can save seeds from. It might not flower and produce seeds in your bioregion, so that's something to know and learn about. But if it will flower and the seeds will dry, you can save seeds from them for sure. So yeah, just knowing the different types of flowers. Some flowers are perfect, like these first two that I've shown. They have the male and female parts on the same flower. That usually means the flower can pollinate itself, but not always. Some plants have male and female flowers are separate. So they have on the same plant, they'll have male flowers and female flowers. And then there's the odd few plants like spinach and cannabis that actually have completely separate male plants and female plants. So one plant will only have male organs and the other female. I want to quickly, there were some questions about the difference between hybrid seeds and open pollinated seeds. And this is really important for us to know. So this is somebody working at trying to produce a hybrid broccoli crop. Hybrid production takes a little bit more precision. It takes a lot of trial and error. Mind you, that's changing a lot with some of the technology that's available today. But I'm just sort of want to go through the reason why we might want to stay away from trying to produce hybrids. So this is an example of a hybrid corn. So a hybrid plant is a plant produced by two parents. Each of those parents are fairly inbred, and you get an idea for inbreeding. Doesn't sound like a positive thing. You don't really want inbred plants. But there's a weird thing that happens when you have two inbred plants. If they're the right parents and you cross them, their offspring has what we term hybrid vigor, and the next generation produces a very uniform, very vigorous plant. So it's great for large-scale monocultures. Absolutely, hybrid production has really benefited large-scale monoculture farming. The problem is, you can see these three corns. So we have parent one, parent two, in the middle is the offspring B. If you now save the seeds from that offspring B and you plant them out, they're not going to produce a new crop of offspring B. They're going to produce either P1 or P2 or something in the middle. You might get the odd offspring B, but probably not. And so this is the main reason that we don't save seeds from hybrids. Now, if I'm a seed breeder and I'm trying to breed a hybrid crop, the way that you do this, you find parent one and you find parent two, and then you cross them, and then you grow it out, and then you see what the offspring's like. If it's no good, you discard those and you find parent three and parent four, and you repeat. And this is done over and over and over again. It's tons of work. A lot of this work is shipped out to countries where labor is cheap, or it's done in universities using university labor. It takes a lot of time to develop a hybrid, to actually find the two parents that make this great hybrid cross. So if I'm sinking all of my time and energy into producing a hybrid, I'm probably going to want to maintain control over that hybrid. So I know who the parent 1 and the parent 2 are. I have them in my lab or in my greenhouse, and I'm not going to share that with anybody. And so I'm going to produce all these hybrid seeds and sell them for as long as I want, until I don't want to anymore, and then I'll stop selling them. And that's how our commercial seed industry works, which is why farmers, over the last however many years, they often find a new variety that works really well for them. And then one year they go to find it in the catalog and it's just been dropped, it disappeared, nobody's offering it anymore, and they now have to find a new variety. And again, these vigorous hybrid plants are great for a lot of farming systems. So it's really sad for us when our favorite variety goes missing. And with this type of seed, you can't reproduce that. So I'm going to mostly talk about what open pollinated seed breeding is like. It's very basically, I noticed there's, okay. So hopefully you can see the screen at the bottom of this curve. This is just a graph of sort of a desired characteristic. So suppose under this curve you have a population of plants, and maybe you're selecting for storability of an onion crop. So you harvest all your onions, and when it comes time to save the seed, an onion is a biennial crop, I'll mention. So you actually grow the onion in the first year, and then you store the onions, and then the next spring you replant them, and then they'll go to seed. So you see this area that's circled in red. Anything outside of that is maybe something that either died in storage or it sprouted too early. I don't want to save it. I want to save from the ones stored really well. And I'm going to replant those the following year. And what happens is the entire graph moves over, the whole population. There's no scale on this. This is very slow work, and it's taken 10,000 years to get to where we are today. But this is the kind of work you need to be doing ongoing to maintain the varieties of seeds that you're growing. This is an old chart. It just sort of shows the loss of diversity over the last 100 years. These are diversity of varieties, not necessarily diversity of genetics. When I look at this graph, this chart, I imagine that 200 years ago, every farmer and every backyard gardener grew their own seeds, most of them, and saved their own seeds. And my tomato is going to be slightly different from my neighbors. And as a result, you have so many different varieties. When you start funneling all that work into a few people's hands, like larger seed companies, there's not a lot of incentive to maintain that many varieties. If seed is a commodity and I want to make money selling seeds, I'd like to sell as many seeds of as few varieties as possible to make that money. So that's basically what's happened over the last couple hundred years. And since the sort of mid 1800s, early 1900s, all of our energy, I'd say 95% of the seed breeding energy has gone into hybrid seed production and genetic modified seed production, and not so much maintaining these old varieties. So that's what everybody here can help with moving forward. So very briefly, there's some breeding mechanisms. Some plants are self-pollinated, some are cross-pollinated. Some people had questions about some of these plants. So self-pollinated plants are usually easier to save seeds from. They usually have perfect flowers or hermaphroditic, meaning they have male and female parts. And sometimes insects increase the rates of pollination. So a self-pollinated plant means that it can cross with itself. It doesn't mean it won't sometimes cross with others. A cross-pollinated plant means it really likes to cross with other individuals, but it doesn't mean it won't sometimes self-pollinate. So there's always exceptions. But down at the bottom, you can see self-pollinated plants, and easy ones, specifically, especially for backyards, community gardens, are things like peas, beans, tomatoes, lettuce. They don't require a lot of space to isolate from others. So if I'm growing a bean in my community garden plot and my neighbor grows one in theirs, they're not going to cross cross with one another. I'll be able to save seeds from both. Some of the cross-pollinated plants, some of the reason it's harder to save seeds from is you need a much larger population. So to maintain corn or carrots, you want to save from about 100 or 200 individuals. And that's a lot probably for a community garden plot. You can do some isolation. You can physically barrier your plants by covering the tassels or covering certain parts of the flower at certain times. And you can hand pollinate squash. And we can talk about that later if people have questions of how to do that. And that would be a way for you to, grow squash in your community garden, grow a few different kinds that might cross with one another, but still maintain the variety. The other thing you can do is keep the plants far away from one another, which works well on a 40-acre farm, but maybe not as well in the backyard garden. And for that, you have to know how far the pollen travels. Timing is another thing. So you can see here's a list of corn and corn flowering time. So at the top there, you have Painted Mountain. Those are sort of the days after planting to when the tassels come out, that's when pollen is flowing. And so as long as you plant corn that has different timings, you can save 2 different varieties of corn from the same field. How to know when your seeds are ready. I think people are asking about some zucchini seeds. This here, the picture on the right-hand side, that's a zucchini. That cleaver is a regular size cleaver, and that's a fairly large cutting board. This is a 2.5, 3 foot long zucchini that has a hard shell. So you don't harvest seeds necessarily the same time you harvest food. You need to think about when the seeds will be mature, not when the food's going to be mature. Picture on the left is lettuce, and that is a dry seeded crop. So these are, you'd save the seeds in 2 different ways. I'll go through this. So this is cleaning techniques. These are cucumber seeds. I left them a little long. You can see there's a little mold on the bucket on the picture on the right. It's okay, you can just scrape that off. It's not going to destroy your seed or anything. Leave it in a bucket just for a couple days. Ideally, come and stir it a couple times a day so the mold doesn't happen. And then what you do is you take that liquid slurry and you mix it with water, and all the good seeds will drop to the bottom and the light seeds will float to the top, and you can just pour the light seeds and any of the scum off. You end up with the dry good seeds in the bottom of the bucket, and then you can pour it into a sieve or something, a screen, and dry it. And this is, yeah, this is, so these are for cucumbers. That would be the same for tomatoes, the same for other squash, winter squash. You can just save the seeds without fermenting it, but what this process does is kind of take off that slimy layer, and then it also allows you to separate the seeds and let those good ones sink and the bad ones float. If you have a glass or clear container, that's the best thing to use because you can actually see what's happening inside. For dry seeded crops, these are, you can use lots of screens. So you're basically just sifting out different sizes. So when you gather your seeds, you're going to find that you've got debris from the field, you've got plant matter. Seeds don't come off the plant the way that they look in a seed packet. There's a lot of cleaning that has to take place. For a backyard growing and for your own seeds, they don't have to be perfectly clean. As long as they're dry, the seeds will still be intact and fine. But obviously for sale, they need to look really clean. On the right-hand side, this is Dan Brisbois of Tournesol Farm in Quebec. This is a winnowing method. So you basically just use a box fan and you sprinkle your dry seeds in front of the fan, and the heaviest seeds will fall closer to the fan. So you lay 3 or 4 totes out, and you basically just gather your seeds based on the quality. The first bucket will have the best quality seeds, and the chaff will be blown. You can use a bowl in your breath if you've got a good lung capacity and you're not gonna make yourself pass out. You know, traditionally people would go out in a windy day and winnow, and there's lots of equipment to help. When you collect seeds, you want to keep them cool, you want to keep them dry, and consistent. There's sort of, this is a basic formula: temperature plus relative humidity in Fahrenheit is less than 100, and you want your temperature less than 50 degrees. This is only for ideal. I'd say for anybody in your house, if you have a dry basement, it's the best place for seeds. You can store seeds in a freezer, but if anybody ever unplugs that freezer accidentally, your seeds are going to be in trouble. So you really want consistent. You don't want the storage conditions to fluctuate too much. And then, of course, protect from rodents and insects and stuff. How long can you keep seeds? I think this is a question somebody had. Seed viability differs based on the crop. You can sort of just Google it, look them up. Where it says your parsnip seed will last 1 year, it doesn't mean that all your parsnip are not going to germinate the next year. It just means that your germination rate drops after 1 year. So ideally, you wouldn't keep it for that much longer. But you know, there's definitely exceptions to these. There's beans that are 1,000 years old that still germinate. But if you know, you'd need to collect 1 million of them to have a couple of them work. I think I'm going to just take a quick break from sharing my screen and just see if there's any questions so far. Are people able to unmute themselves, or you can type questions in the chat box? And if not, I will continue. Okay, I'm going to continue sharing screen. So somebody's got a question about harvesting true seeds. Maybe just so I understand the question, when you say true seeds, sorry, this is from Nina. Are you referring to seeds that will come true? Like, so you save seeds from a tomato that's a red tomato and you plant it and you get another red tomato?
No, tree seeds.
Oh, tree seeds. Oh, okay. Like any other plant, I would say wait till the seeds are ready and try planting them. And like any other plant, you probably want to understand how that tree crosses with one another. So, for example, you can plant apple seeds. Apples aren't typically propagated by seed, though, because if I save a seed from a gala apple and I plant it, I'm not going to get a gala apple. It probably has crossed with a number of different apples in whichever orchard it came from. So I'm going to get an apple, and it might not be a very good apple. So you might have to plant 1,000 of those, wait 8 to 10 years before you can start tasting them, and then cut out the ones that aren't producing good apples for you. And there's definitely people that do this, and that is how we've got all the apples that we have. So yeah, like any other seed, just needing to understand how the pollination happens. Did you have a specific tree you were curious about? No, okay.
No, not specifically.
Yeah. So it's very similar to any other plant. It's you know, it's like gardening. If we all are tomato growers and suddenly you're going to start taking on a broccoli project, it's going to take you a while to figure out how to grow broccoli. So every plant is different, and the way that their seeds are produced and the way their genetics work is different for every plant. So it's quite specific, yeah, for each one. Any other questions? Okay, so somebody has a dogwood tree. They're wondering when the seeds are ready to be taken off the tree. I mean, often what I do is look at plants have really amazing mechanisms for spreading their own seeds. So, you know, you'll notice a dandelion is ready when the seeds start blowing off the dandelion and floating around. Some seeds, like fruits like tomatoes, they're ready when the tomato falls on the ground and rots over winter, and then the seeds germinate the next year. Same thing for squashes. So whatever seed it is, a dogwood tree, I would wait, just look at the seeds, see how they germinate, wait to see when they're dry and sort of ready. Ideally, you want your seeds to fully mature on the plant. We can't always do that in this climate. Sometimes we need to bring seeds in a little bit early. We live in a wet climate. So for example, I showed a picture of lettuce seeds. They're easy seeds to grow in your garden, but you got to get an early start because they're producing seeds at this time of year. And if we have an early wet season and you have dry seeds in your plant and then it starts raining, your seeds are all going to be ruined. Anybody growing quinoa knows that that's a huge issue. Even just to produce quinoa for eating, you have to have that seed dry and it can't get wet at that late stage when it's, you know, fully maturing. There's no other questions. I'm going to go on and I'll just go through a few examples of some of the breeding projects that that I've played with over the years. So this is an open pollinated population of a shallot. This is called Ed's red shallot. This was an example of us saving seeds over winter, getting rid of the ones that sprouted or didn't look that good. Certainly anything that rotted wasn't even able to be replanted. And here I have there's 100 or so shallots being planted. I would have originally pulled in about 200 to 300 in the fall and then sorted for the best ones. And in my case, I would sell the ones that don't look great. And that's sort of what I mean by maintenance and breeding rather than saving. It's not rocket science. In some ways, it's way more complicated than that, but it's also fairly easy. And you can let nature do a lot of it. Whatever rots in storage has selected itself out. This is a tomato. It's called an alpha tomato. I believe this picture was taken late June, and these plants are planted outside without any cover or protection. So the virtue of this variety is that it produces tomatoes very early. They're not the most delicious tomatoes, but they produce well, and they're great for processing and canning. The trick to these tomatoes is the earliest tomatoes that are produced on the plant have no seeds in them. The reason this variety produces fruit so early is it has a special mechanism by which it can produce fruit without making seeds, which is fairly rare. So how would I select for early tomatoes in this case? So the way to do it is here I've got a plant that's produced these early tomatoes. I can go and take those tomatoes, but there's no seed. So what I need to do is mark that plant. The later tomatoes, the tomatoes later in the year that are being pollinated by insects, they have seeds in them. They typically end up being a lot smaller than these first ones, but they'll have seeds. So I've got to mark the plant when I know which plant is my desirable plant, and then save the fruit from that plant. So somebody had asked a question about saving seeds from a tomato, and they were asking, I think it was maybe a cherry tomato, which tomato would be the best one to save seeds from. So if you think about it, that one plant that you're saving seeds from, every tomato in that has the same genetics, the same mother line as every other one. So whether you take a small tomato late in the year or a bigger tomato at the beginning, the genetics are basically the same. You don't know what the male parent is. Hopefully if you're growing tomatoes and you want them to come true to seed, you would have only one variety and you would know that the male parent was at least that same variety, but you don't know. So you can basically take seeds from any plant. What you want to look for is the plant, not the fruit. So again, in this case, these are nice big fruits, but there's no seeds in them. And even if I take seeds from the tiny little fruit later in the year from that same plant, I'm going to be reproducing that same plant. So don't think of it always as fruit. You're not selecting for fruit size and shape, you're selecting for the whole plant. And that's really important because if you end up with a pile of tomatoes at the end of the year and you start saving seeds after they're already harvested, you're going through all these tomatoes and you're choosing the ones that look the best and maybe taste the best, but the one you selected might have been a terrible yielding plant. So you've got a delicious tomato that's going to make you 1 tomato a year. You have to kind of know what the whole plant looks like, not just the fruit. This is radish. So here we were saving seed. This is called an Ostergrus radish. It's a long pointy thing. These things can get like over a foot long and stay tender still. And we're selecting for shape mostly. So again, I would harvest like 200-300 of these, keep the straightest ones and sell the ones that are slightly crooked. And you do this year after year just to maintain the variety. This one was accidentally, so here's how nature selected for us. The picture on the bottom, this is Frise. It was planted, I think 3 years ago when we had a horrible drought and we couldn't get anything to grow on the ground. These things were planted. The next day was probably 34 degrees. I remember I was giving somebody a tour and they walked past this field and laughed at us and thought, we just wasted our time planting all this Frise. All of it looked completely dead. The picture at the top is about 3 weeks later. So you can see we did lose quite a bit of it. It looks like maybe 40% of the plants never made it. So we were selecting inadvertently for some form of drought tolerance. I mean, it's possible that some of the plants were just planted wrong or planted deeper, and you don't ever know what is genetic and what is just cultural, but you just assume that it's genetic when you're doing seed saving. So this is out of some of the work I do through the Bauda Family Initiative on Seed Security. There's been some potato breeding that's happened. I believe there was a question about potato seeds, so I'll speak to that here. Basically, there was a professor at the University of Manitoba who made some crosses of potatoes and then sent it out to about 25 different farmers, and they've been selecting potatoes over the last 7 years. These pictures are all taken in the same field of different varieties of potato. So we all know that blight affects potatoes really badly. And the way that modern agriculture has dealt with that has been with fungicides and laboratories to make sure that the seed, and when we say potato seed, we often refer to a potato, which is not a true seed, make sure that that's disease-free. And so we've sort of focused our disease protection on laboratories and fungicides rather than breeding. And you can see from these pictures, some varieties, while they completely die from blight, other ones growing right beside them thrive and aren't even touched by it. So there's a lot of opportunity here. So here's potatoes, and the picture on the left there of the little fruits in somebody's hand, those are actual potato seeds. That's what potato fruit looks like. The bottom is just the swollen root, and that's the part we eat. When you replant those, you're just asexually reproducing that plant. So every russet potato is genetically actually the exact same plant. Over the years, they pick up mutations, and it might be slightly genetically different, but not very. If you save those little fruits and you just bring them into the house, let them kind of dry up and shrivel, they have tiny, tiny little seeds in them. Each of those potato fruits probably has, 200 seeds in them. When you plant those out, you get a completely new potato. It might not look that different, but it might. It'll grow very differently. If you save seeds from a fruit like that, you grow it out and you decide it's really good and you start propagating by tubers, you have invented and come up with your own new variety of potato. I'll just mention as well, just briefly, there are some laws and rules around potato seed production and potato registration. In Canada, most of the vegetable seeds, if you come up with a new variety, you can register it. Potato and grains are quite different. You can't legally come up with a new potato variety unless you go through a pretty rigorous bureaucratic and testing process. One of the things they do test for, though, are glycoalkaloids, which are a chemical that does exist in certain wild varieties of potatoes. You're probably safe to save seeds from your own potatoes if those varieties are safe to eat. but there is a stipulation that you cannot sell potatoes without a certain level of glycoalkaloids, and there are some labs in Canada that you could test those levels at. So if you actually get a potato, for the most part, you'll know it'll be quite bitter and hard to eat if it has high levels. But if you wanted to be sure, you can get your project tested. This is an example of a potato. It came to me from Peru. It was a long, skinny purple potato. This one tuberizes. It's a tropical potato, so it only starts tuberizing in September, which means I planted this thing, I dug around for roots all summer long. I didn't find anything until about this time of year, it started making tubers. And I thought, well, that's a useless potato. It's going to die from blight before I get anything. This thing grew through buckets and puddles of water into October and made some tubers. They were tiny and it wasn't really worth saving as a variety. However, I did replant them and I saved the seeds, the true seeds from these, and I've planted them out. And I've just repeated this process every year, and I'm now getting what look very similar kind of potatoes. They're slightly different in appearance, but they're tuberizing much earlier. And it's probably because those crossed with other potatoes in my field that do tuberize earlier. I'm gonna actually just pause again and see if there's any other questions, because I can't hear anybody while I'm, so I do notice there's a few questions. Oh, okay, the early fruiting variety that, that I was showing is called the Alpha tomato. It originally came to me through Harold Steves, who's a Richmond councillor and was actually one of the original founding members of the Agricultural Land Reserve, and his family runs a seed farm. Yeah, and it's an old variety that they've had in their family for a long, long time. You can probably find the seeds for sale on BC Eco Seed Co-op website, or you can try finding, I think Harold's still sells seeds at Seedy Saturdays in Richmond. If lettuce seeds, so here's a question, if lettuce seeds are not quite mature, can you pick the whole plant and bring them inside the garage to finish maturing? So like a lot of fruits, for example, a tomato, you can pick tomatoes that aren't fully ripe and they will ripen afterwards. But if you pick a fully green tomato, it probably is never going to turn red. So seeds are kind of like that. You have to know that your plant is close enough to producing mature seeds. If your lettuce plant is in flower and you don't see any of that, the sort of fine frilly, the fluffy stuff that looks like dandelion fluff on the top of it, it's probably not going to be mature enough to produce seed. But if it's producing some of that fluffy stuff, you could probably bring it in. Lettuce seed's tricky because it produces seed not all at once. This is the case with most plants. So you sort of want to keep observing when it starts going into flower and when the seeds start forming, continue to observe it and wait until it's at the stage where, say, half of them have produced seed, and then you can bring them in. And you have to play by weather. So if only a quarter of them have produced seed and you have 2 weeks of rain coming, pull your plants and get what you can. If you know you can wait a little bit longer, then wait. The other reason you might need to pull plants in early is some seeds, when they disperse, they really disperse and they drop their seeds. So as soon as they're mature, they're all over the ground. You can use that to your advantage and put a tarp underneath a plant and wait till they drop the seeds for you. Or I know I've tried to save seeds from borage plants for a while, and you know, borage flowers, they kind of open up and then they drop down and then the seed opens like this and the seed drops out. So if you want to save seeds from borage, I usually look to see when some of the mature seeds are mature, and then I'll bring it in and hang the whole plant. If you pull it up right from the roots, get as much plant on as you can, there's going to be more energy to go into seeds, and you'll see a lot of those flowers still opening and producing seeds even after the plant's out of the ground. Do you continue to water regularly while plant is bolting, or do you cut back on water? So I think this was a mistake I made a lot when I first started growing seeds. I thought, oh, it's just going to make seeds. I'll just let it go. I don't need to water that crop. It's true. And if you do that with any other crop, your crop might survive, but you're not going to get a great crop. So if you want really good quality seeds, yeah, you do need to water it. There is a dry down time for sure that's good for it, but when the plant is flowering, you want to keep giving it water. When the plant is drying down, then yes, you can definitely cut off water. And one of the reasons we have such a great climate for seed production in British Columbia is we have this really wet spring and decently wet summer, and then we tend to have a drought at the end of the year when seeds are drying. There's tons of seeds grown down in Oregon, down in the Willamette Valley, and it's for that same reason. You know, there's fields and fields of beets and cabbages and spinach down there drying down this time of year. Okay, don't think I see any more questions. We have about 15 minutes left. Maybe I'll go on and just share, because there was a question about hybrid production. I just wanted to share a project. I had said you can't save seeds from hybrids, and I'll just share a project in which I show you that you can save seeds from hybrids. Okay, so this is a plant we used to grow on the farm a lot. It is called white peacock kale. It's a hybrid, which means that I plant this plant out, and every single plant looks almost identical to this in my field. I know that it's a hybrid, and we had to keep buying seeds, and I really wanted to get away from that, but there was nothing equivalent to this out there. It was probably early on in my seed saving days. I did one of those typical seed saving things where I had a crop of Brussels sprouts in the field, and it all went to flower. We never harvested it in time. So the next year I thought, oh great, free Brussels sprout seeds. So I saved them all. And I saved them and brought them in. And later that year I was at a seed saving workshop, and we were talking about brassicas and how they cross-pollinate, and how Brussels sprouts will cross with cabbage and kale and collards. And I sat there realizing that I actually didn't have Brussels sprouts. I had something else. And this was the beginning of about a 14, it's going on maybe 16 year now, breeding project. It's an open pollinated white kale. Today it's called white winter kale sprouts, and it can be purchased through BC EcoSeed. It's a very wild variety. It's not very, it doesn't look very maintained. There's a lot of diversity in it. So you can see here's some pictures of some of the individuals. So again, this hybrid kale, all of them are going to look the same. This white peacock kale, they did not look the same at all. The process, however, was I was hoping to save seeds that look kind of like the white peacock kale. So the first year I planted 20 flats of this out. There's 100 plants in every flat, so that's 2,000 plants. And I selected down to 100 plants that looked the most like the white peacock kale. And I was selecting them when they were only about 3-4 inches tall at that stage in the flat. So I didn't have to put them all in the field first, but I got rid of anything that had big wide leaves and not that sort of denticulated pattern. You can also see leaf color often on seedlings based on the stem color. So this was the beginning of this project. When I first was doing it, I thought I was saving seed that we could use as a kale in our salads. And then I noticed that the one year doing this, I'm making these white sprouts up the stem, and I thought, wow, that'd be a cool thing to select for. So I started saving for that. There's a couple years later that we had a terrible winter. We lost every single kale in our field, which I haven't seen in 20 years I've lived on the farm. This variety, however, not a single individual died. They all made it through, and I realized, oh, I guess I'm saving for winter hardiness as well, because it has that sort of Brussels sprout gene in it. So it was just kind of an ongoing project. I mentioned I saved seeds for about 16 years. This is a biennial plant, which means the process of saving seeds takes 2 years. So I plant the seeds out in about June. The plant has to go through the winter. I plant out about 200 feet I go through that bed and I choose the nicest 50 plants. I dig them out of the ground in the spring. I move them to another field so that when they flower, they don't cross with all the other ones I don't want to cross with. And I repeat. And so 16 years actually only gives you the opportunity to save seeds 8 times. And if you think you're going to not have a crop failure in 16 years, then you're an amazing farmer. So I haven't been able to save 8 times, but maybe six or 5 or 4 to 6 so far. So this is where I've moved them to 1 year. You can see there's still some diversity in it, but I'm trying to save for a somewhat uniform pattern and shape. This is kind of what they look like on a plate. I think I'm gonna stop sharing screen again and see if there are any more questions. It looks like there are. Okay, so somebody's asking, after harvesting seeds, would you let them dry longer out before packaging? Yes, absolutely. Especially in our climate, there's moisture in the air this time of year and in your home. And if you take seeds that you think are kind of dry and you put them in a plastic package, you're going to come back to moldy seeds in the spring. So yeah, you want to make sure they're dry before you put them in anything, especially like plastic. I usually recommend putting seeds in a paper bag. If you want to put them in a paper bag and then protect them in a plastic bag as well, at least the paper gives a little bit of buffer for the moisture. So yeah, definitely let them dry right down. Can you save dahlia seeds? Yes, you can save dahlia seeds. Dahlias are kind of like potatoes. If you think of that Brussels sprout cross project, that's a project that's gone on 16 years now, and I'm still not getting a uniform variety out of it. I'm still planting it and getting a lot of different individuals. A dahlia is kind of like a potato that's usually propagated by tubers. So like a potato or any plant that you save seeds from, you can save seed from a dahlia, but if you save seeds from your favorite beautiful multicolored, yellow and red dahlia and you plant those seeds, you're probably not going to get that same flower. It's probably going to revert back to something that's not multicolored, possibly smaller heads. But that being said, save 100 seeds, plant them all out and see what you get. And if you do get something really interesting, you don't have to continue your seed breeding project for another 14 years. You just propagate the tubers. So you can create a new variety very fast with something like dahlia. People were asking about carrots and beets. Do you leave them out over winter or replant in a bucket in the garage? So I believe, so some people asked about saving seeds from plants that don't flower, and I'm anticipating that maybe some of the question was around these biennial plants that we don't ever see them flower, because you always harvest them before they flower because they're biennial. So these plants need to go through a cold period in order to trigger them into the next stage of their life, which is making seeds. So we actually run a project. It's a carrot breeding project, and we partner with a professor down in the States, in the US, from the USDA, and he actually grows carrots out for us down in the border of Southern California. So we're able to grow carrots up here, and then we want, or carrot seed up here, and then we want the carrots to be produced. Normally I would wait until the next spring, plant them, save the carrots, and then the next year I would grow seeds out. Because we're partnering with this person, we can grow the seeds, send them to him. He'll grow the carrot roots out in the southern states during the winter, and then he'll ship them to us in February, but then we have to keep them in the cooler for a certain period of time. I can't remember the requirement. I think it's 30 days, because it has to go through that cold period before it will trigger itself into making seed. So you don't have to leave them. You don't leave them in the ground. I don't leave my carrots or beets in the ground because I have a huge vole population in the winter and they'd all get eaten. If you don't, and your carrots will overwinter in the ground, absolutely you can leave them in the ground and you can save seeds from them the next year. The one thing that doesn't give you the ability to do, though, is select for root shape. So I like to select for root shape if I'm selecting a carrot. And for that, you need to pull them out of the ground to look at them. You can also taste carrots before replanting. So when you plant a carrot, you don't plant the whole carrot. You just cut a steckling off of the top of the carrot and replant that. So when we do carrot breeding or carrot selection, we taste every carrot before we decide whether we're gonna save seeds from that one or not. So you can just cut the bottom off, take little slivers, and taste the carrot. For beets, you can save seeds from, you can taste beets as well. Beets, however, if you cut the bottom of the beet off, it's not gonna grow again. So you have to take a slice off of the side of the beet before you taste it. And you might wanna do that later in the year before you plant, not in the spring, because you're gonna cause a cut in the beet that could rot easier over winter. So beets and carrots, probably something you're not gonna do in a backyard or community garden unless you do a collaborative project between community gardens. And if anybody's interested in doing that, stay tuned, because hopefully we'll have something for you next year. Okay, can you walk us through onion, garlic seed saving? Yeah, two very different things. Onions will make seeds just like any biennial crop. They're beautiful, the insects love them. They're so nice to have in your garden. They make big pom-pom-like flowers, so do leeks. Garlic very rarely makes seeds. So garlic hardneck varieties will make a scape, and they'll make a little bulblet on the top of the plant. People have probably seen these, and I hear people referring to those as seeds. Those bulblets are actually genetically identical to the bulbs, and you're actually just reproducing that plant asexually when you plant from bulblets. What you do though is, because garlic isn't grown from seed and you're always pulling the garlic out of your soil, over the years, your seed will develop viruses, there's nematodes that live in there, there's all kinds of things that infect your seed. And in order to break that disease cycle, you can plant the bulblets from the top because they haven't lived in the soil at all, plant them out. The first year they make a single round clove, and then you plant that. The next year they'll make a regular size clove, but maybe on the small side. And then the following year they'll make really big cloves. And so garlic producers will be reinvigorating their seeds all the time by doing this. You can save true seed from garlic. It's very tricky. There's very few people doing it. When the scape forms, you'll see there's tiny, tiny little flowers in that little bulblet thing. You kind of pull out the bulblet so the flowers have a bit more space. They will occasionally make a seed or two, and they will occasionally germinate, but not very well. So it's I take my hats off to anybody who is dedicated to that project, and there's a few people out there. I have lentils and garbanzo beans that I've dried on the plant. How do I save these for seed? So if they're dried on the plant, you just bring them in and clean them up. I mean, they're basically already saved. So the cleaning process for things like beans, you can put them on a tarp and dance on them. That's always fun. You can roll them in your hand. You can put them in something and shake. You just basically want the plants, the seeds out of their shells. And then you can use some kind of winnowing technique. There's a question here about going on a little longer. This is supposed to end at 4:30, but I'm happy to stay on for another sort of 15-20 minutes after 4:30 if people want to, if there's more questions. So I'll keep taking questions. And you can probably send any questions that you think of after this through Jessica. I'm happy to answer questions, or you can send it directly to me. I will share my contact information at the end. So yeah, hopefully that if I'm answering your question and I haven't fully answered it, please speak up or throw another message in the chat box. But yeah, I believe that yeah, if your lentils and beans are dry, just pull them off the plant and they're good to go. Okay, somebody's mentioned a Canadian Seed Society. So somebody said I mentioned I worked with the Canadian Seed Society. Tell us a little more about that, about my work. I think maybe you're referring to the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security. It was a project that started 7 years ago. There was a huge amount of money that came from the Bauta family, who is behind Western Grocers. Anyway, they've been very supportive, and it is really what started a lot of the seed saving work across Canada and kind of invigorated this work. They did a great job of sharing resources. There were farmers that were able to purchase seed cleaning equipment, and we still have a long way to go. So I work running a variety of programs in British Columbia, and my counterparts in other provinces run programs in their provinces, and some of those overlap. So one of the big things that you need to do when you get into seed breeding is you need to think about the parent stock that you're working with. So if I'm breeding a new carrot, I want to know what carrots are out there. Why am I breeding a new carrot? Maybe there's no need for a new carrot and everybody's happy with the carrots that exist. So the program that we do, we first survey as many farmers as we can. We ask them what crops they're not so happy with. The first year it was spinach. I can't find a spinach that doesn't bolt very easily. I need an open pollinated, non-bolting spinach. So we researched, got probably 12 to 20 different varieties, sent them to 20 to 40 farmers across the country. They planted trials out in their farm. They sent us back data, and these trials need to be done for at least 2 to 3 years per crop, because it doesn't tell you a lot when you plant one of these trials in your field. It does tell you a lot when you have that replicated in 40 fields, but it's also really good to know how each of those varieties does in a wet year and a dry year, and so you need to repeat it. So yeah, so that's a lot of the work we do with different farmers, is trialing seeds and trying to come up with which varieties do well and where we need to be focusing some of the breeding work. And then I mentioned that potato participatory breeding project. So there's a number of PPB programs, which stands for participatory plant breeding. And those are, so we're doing potato, we've done oats and wheat. So we actually have a wheat farmer in Canada right now who's selected his own wheat variety. We're not wheat growing region. It's too wet for wheat here. You know, wheat lodges over in our wet climate, and so for him to have saved a variety that works well for him is amazing. Again, the way registration works with those crops, it'll be almost impossible for a farmer to have the resources to register that new variety. So one of the things that the Bauta program did is we hired a policy analyst to help us work through some of the red tape. In the end, what I find farmers really want to do is just grow and sell the food, and they're not really interested in making it a new variety or registering it or anything like that. So, but for those who do, we're hoping to be able to help people do that. I'm not sure if I'm seeing many other questions here. There was a question about, I think somebody mentioned in one of my questions earlier, they were asking about saving a seed from a fruit that you got from the store. So yes, you can do that, but again, know that you don't know what the fruit is, and you don't know what the parents are. And so I actually stopped somebody in the store recently who was buying squash because they wanted to save the seeds. And I said, well, if that squash is grown in the same field as pumpkin, you're not going to get that same seed out of that squash. And she actually didn't even want the squash, so she returned them and didn't buy them. And so just know that you don't know what the parents are. Same thing if you're buying a bedding plant. I mean, if it's labeled and you know the variety and you can grow that out to seed, no problem. But if you don't know the variety or where the seeds come from, then you're not really sure what it is that you're growing. So what's my favorite way to start seeds? The process, soak or just pop in the soil? dome them. So I start seeds differently. There's some seeds, and you know, we find this out when we do germination tests for seeds. A germination test tells you how many seeds will germinate given ideal conditions. So, you know, I tried to germinate sweet Sicily seed. I just planted it in the soil. I didn't get any germination. It was 0% because sweet Sicily has to go through a cold period. So for those, I would plant them in a flat, put them in a cooler or my fridge, and then take them out, and then you're gonna get lots of germination. So different seeds, different methods. I tend to just put them in the soil. I don't soak them first. Sweet peas, I have a hard time sprouting, so sometimes I'll soak those first. Make sure if you soak them, you're not soaking them for too long, and ideally you stir the water a bit so it's not, they don't kind of sit in stagnant water. But yeah, I often just pop them in the ground. I grow stuff on a heat table early in the year. For me, it's the sunlight is the trickiest thing. You'll know if you try to grow seeds early in the year, you get these long, leggy, stretchy plants. So that's more a trick of starting seeds. Okay, I'm not seeing many other questions. I'll give you a couple minutes and then maybe I'll just share some resources. Maybe I'll just share my screen again and I'll put some resources on, and you're welcome to copy them down. I don't know if I even have resources here. These are some of the projects we do. So I'll just go through very briefly the projects. You can find me by looking up FarmFolk CityFolk. My email address is bcseeds@farmfolkcityfolk.ca. And you're welcome to get in touch with me through that email. These are some of the programs that we run. The Citizen Seed Trial is a program that's kind of like a variety trial, but for home gardeners. So typically we send out a few different varieties of seeds and you compare one to the other. This year we actually sent out variety as well as a breeding, an in-process breeding project so that people could see what kind of diversity you get with a breeding project. So for example, the tomatoes, we sent out Soleil tomatoes. Those are an orange cherry tomato. And then we sent out tomatoes from a dwarf project. The dwarf project has red, yellow, large tomatoes, small tomatoes. So it was kind of fun for people to engage in that process. And we'll probably do something like that again next year. This project, the seed farm. So in Abbotsford, we have a 2.5 acre organically run seed farm. We're growing a lot of different crops there. We repeat our replicated trials. And on years where we can have public gatherings with lots of people, we would be happy to invite you out there. We do have the odd work party or farm visits even during COVID times with minimal people and some social distance in place. I think I mentioned the BC Seed Trials and CANOVI. CANOVI stands for Canadian Organic Vegetable Improvement. So these are the seed trials that we do across the country. We are partnering with UBC and then all of the representatives across the country. The mobile seed cleaner, this was a pilot project we did. We invested in a whole lot of seed cleaning equipment and put it in a trailer. And last year was the first year we hauled it around the province. We cleaned over 50,000 pounds of seeds and probably, I'm guessing, 50 to 60 different varieties of seeds. This year, we haven't cleaned the whole bulk amount, but we are cleaning lots of farmer seeds, and we'll be taking it to, the trailer was just in Kamloops, so it'll be going to Vancouver Island, and then it's stationed here in the mainland for people to be able to borrow it if they want. On our website, we have all kinds of a resource directory and other sort of publications and resources that you can use. I'll just mention briefly BC Eco Seed Co-op. This is a cooperative now. This picture was taken a few years ago of some of the members. This co-op now has about 17 farmers in it. It's a cooperative seed business. They are all BC grown seeds, and they're sold collectively. If anybody on this call is a farmer and is interested in getting into seed production, and you don't want to put all the resources into starting your own seed company, this is a great way to be able to market and sell your seeds. The open source seed initiative, I really want to share this because I think it's a great project happening in the States. This is the opposite of plant patenting. This is the pledge that comes with all open source seeds. You have the freedom to use these seeds in any way you choose. In return, you pledge not to restrict the other's use of the seeds or any of their derivatives by patents or other means, and to include this pledge in any transfer of the seeds going forward. So what that means is, so my white winter kale sprouts has been pledged through open source seed initiative. So that means if a company takes my seeds and breeds a new plant, they cannot patent that plant. Whether this will hold up in court or not, I'm not sure. It's more a pledge than a legal thing, but it's a start. And I think that's the end of the slides I have. So if there aren't more questions, I guess I will, yeah.
I would just like to pop in.
Yeah.
And you said that you were going to upload this to the FarmFolk CityFolk YouTube channel?
Yes, yeah, I'll upload the webinar to it, sure, this, and then, yeah, so people can visit the site there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is great. I've learned so much. I'm very excited for to get started next year. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and just in closing, what I'll finish with people, because I feel like sometimes people get scared off with all there is to learn about it. Just go save seeds. I learned so much from that white winter kale sprout cross about how plants work just by making mistakes and trial and error and every year. So don't worry about messing up, just save seeds and share the seeds. And the important thing I think for us all to do in moving forward, because I want to promote good quality seed production, is just make sure when you save your seeds, let the story carry with the seeds. So if you don't know if you did a great job, just let people know. Like, I saved these kale seeds, they might have crossed with something else, try them out. And then it's fine if they've crossed with something else. So yeah, I just encourage everybody to just keep doing it. And I guess I'll say happy gardening and thanks for the opportunity to share. And please reach out if you have questions.